We're less than 3 weeks out from Baldurs Gate 3 Early Access, and now we know it's going to be DRM free. We've had the confirmation that it's going to be on GOG. All is looking good, but my only concern is that Larian seems to be moving in more and more of a mainstream direction, and there's been a lot of talk about Twitch integration. I'm a little bit concerned that it might affect the role-playing game and affect that negatively, so I want to talk a little bit about what that might mean and also everything Baldurs Gate 3, so let's get stuck in. Hi, Estelden here. This has all crept up pretty quickly. I know we're just getting early access for Baldurs Gate 3, but in my mind, it hasn't really been that long since the game was announced, so it'll be really nice to dive in to the first act of the game at the very end of the month. I do think having games like Wasteland 3 to preoccupy me has definitely made the wait for this feel shorter, but I mean it's a pretty stacked time for RPGs. I can't really think of a busier period for mainstream RPGs in the last little while. Last year, I mean, we did have the Outer Worlds and there was Disco Elysium during the second half of the year too, but Disco was certainly much more indie than this run we're having now in Wasteland 3, Baldur's Gate, and then Cyberpunk in November, assuming of course it doesn't get another delay. I do have to wonder if Microsoft and Sony are walking around on eggshells at the moment, since it's probably the big game that they're really banking on, since most of their internal games, like Halo Infinite, we've had a recent one from Sony today, those games have all been delayed. But for us, PC players, we really don't care because we've still got Baldur's Gate 3. The general vibe I've been getting over the last few months is a lot of the negativity surrounding the Divinity similarities has kind of eased off a bit. I know a lot of people were probably expecting a Baldur's Gate 3 that really emulated that BioWare style, but I'm personally really not that bothered. I do prefer turn-based combat to real-time with pause, and I do think more recent footage of the game has really shown it is much more ambitious than just a reskin of Divinity. This is quite obviously a big step up in terms of production values compared to Divinity, which by the way did look great and was wonderful in its own right. This just looks like the next step up. I do have some concerns though, because one constant with the studio expanding, getting bigger, larger budgets and all of that, is there's a lot more pressure to create that return on all of that investment. I'm not sure how these deals are worked out, but I'm sure that Larian are at least sharing some of the profits of this game with Wizards of the Coast, so it's not like this is 100% their IP, such as it is with Divinity. When you need a big return on investment, that's where I just have a slight concern with the integrity of the game and how it's going to be delivered to fans of RPGs. What I will say is I do have great trust in Larian though. A lot of people do talk about how CD Projekt Red are this big wonderful company, we should all look at them as an example of how to do ethics in video games, but I don't completely agree with that. I think people can be suckered in a little sometimes with things like the free DLC in Witcher 3, which to me really felt obviously like little quests that had been left out of the main game and then sprinkled in over time to create goodwill with the players. I do like CD Projekt Red, I love using GOG, it's a great alternative, but that's more because of the value that GOG creates. And I think their great PR is something that they've created for themselves with brilliant marketing, not necessarily just because they're perfect specimens. Larian though until now has just been doing what they can to stay afloat while also producing great titles. We heard some time ago that Original Sin was the game they always wanted to make, but publisher meddling meant it couldn't happen, so I mean we were always going to be pretty safe with Original Sin and 1 too. The proof is obviously in the pudding, they're fantastic games. Baldur's Gate 3 though, that is where they've got to pull out all the stops. For them to keep growing, justify all of this investment and ensure it's a big commercial success, it obviously needs to do very well, and let's face it, traditional RPGs just haven't been high on publishers' lists for commercial viability these days. Wasteland 3, for example, it looks really good, it's been doing really well, but I doubt it's anywhere near the juggernaut a modern action RPG experience like Witcher 3 has proven to be. The reason I've had some concerns though is that Larian put out a community update on Steam yesterday, and there were a few things in there that did set off some alarm bells for me. Not like, the boat is sinking, everyone abandoned ship, not like a massively serious alarm like that. That's more of like a Fallout 76 sort of alarm, really, really serious. This one was more like you've slightly overcooked something in the oven, accidentally set off the house alarm, no biggie, just a small alarm, but I still think it's worth addressing, because if Larian or another RPG developer goes overboard with this kind of thing, it could turn into that abandoned ship alarm, it could become a very big problem. What I'm referring to specifically is this Twitch integration, streaming integration. I'll say I've got nothing against streaming or streamers, it's something I'd like to do a bit of in the future, so I'd be an absolute fucking hypocrite to start mocking it and then boot up my own stream one day. That'd look especially stupid. I'm not going to do that, but I also do think we need to be very careful about potentially designing game mechanics and systems around making streams more enjoyable. I don't think I'm wrong in thinking that most RPG fans in particular probably play a game for themselves. They don't want to enjoy the game through their favourite Twitch streamer. That's something extra that some people might do, but certainly not all or the majority. The feature itself that's been described has been called Crowd Choice. Basically, it's a Stadia-enhanced features, and that's more alarm bells, you're probably thinking the same. It means fucking Google probably had something to do with making this happen, so I'm a little bit concerned. But what it will do is it'll allow viewers to vote on what choices the streamer will make when they go through the game. To give an example, you might be talking to an NPC, and then you'll get a few skill check options that come up, you might get a strength option, there might be an intimidation option, and 70% of viewers might then vote on the strength option, so that's the one that gets picked. That's a short description anyway, and the feature will not just be launching with the Stadia version, but also with the PC version as well. On the surface, this might not seem like a big deal. I mean, who cares? You can just not get involved in streaming, just play the game yourself. Surely it's a non-issue. I think we've said that about a lot of things in the past. For example, microtransactions, you can choose not to buy them. Quest markers, you can just turn them off. In a lot of games, that's the case. Well, as we all know, game design is quite complicated, and those features have had their games designed around them to ensure they work. Games are designed around microtransactions at times to increase their value proposition and ensure more people are buying them. I worry the same could happen with this crowd choice feature. RPGs to me are a very personal thing. Everyone plays them a little bit differently, they've got different priorities, different aspects of the game that they enjoy, and I've got to say I really like being immersed in the game and making choices that I feel make sense for my character or my party. Again, I know that's not for everyone. Plenty of people play RPGs and just make choices they would personally pick, or they might not even care too much. They just pick whatever sounds cool or fun. None of those to me are wrong answers or the wrong way to play. I don't think there is a wrong way to play an RPG. But when you have crowd choice as a feature in there and both publishers and developers know that this is increasing the marketing presence of the game, more people are playing it on Twitch, everyone's watching, everyone's now buying the game, they might think, right, let's double down on that and make it the standout feature. A publisher might look at this and decide that choices within the game should now be based around being entertaining for the audience and not necessarily what makes sense within the context of the video game. There's also the fact that sometimes you won't really get a big range of choices. You might have a character that is quite focused on intelligence as a stat, not so much some of the other stats. And when he hits a skill check, you'll only have the option of an intelligence check or maybe just proceeding with dialogue as normal. And this doesn't really support the crowd choice system since there's really only one interesting choice in there. So it might then encourage devs to have to throw in a lot more low effort, low skill checks just to create variety and get people voting and interacting with the streamer. I do want to make it clear that I don't really think Larian are doing that, at least not right now, and it's why I wanted to just hammer home that I do trust them. I don't necessarily think that Larian are actually doing that, and it is why I wanted to really hammer home that I really do trust them. I do think that they've probably just included this feature in good faith, and they just see it as a fun way to make the game more streamer viable, and I really do understand that. I've heard a lot of different streamers talk about games like this, RPGs, and plenty do point out that streaming story-heavy games can be really difficult. It's hard for someone to try and get their 2 cents in during a long cutscene or dialogue-heavy sections without then talking over the top of the game, which isn't really fun for anyone. So adding something on top of that to make the stream a little easier and a little bit more engaging for a viewer, I can see the logic in it. But I will say that I have to kind of question how this positively affects the stream overall, given if you do build a character who isn't overly combat proficient and likes to talk his way out of situations, you'll probably get a ton of trolls trying to turn every dialogue encounter into a fight, rather than playing to the player character's strengths, which might bring on a few laughs, but it'll ultimately worsen the experience overall for all involved. It'll become far less fun to watch, and the streamer probably won't enjoy the game as much either. Again, this feature is not like some mandatory addition, you can quite easily play with it off, but it does come back to how the game is made and how future RPGs might be designed. If this is just a one-off, a little bit of fun, a little feature that does no harm, then absolutely fine, I will not care. If it means in the future every RPG is going to have this and devs are going to be pressured to ensure every situation keeps the community engaged at the expense of the integrity and the purpose of the story, then I will have a problem. So we'll just have to see if this garners a lot of attention, a lot of interest, or if it ends up just being something a handful of people use and isn't really a big deal. My concern also comes from the fact that big publishers are always looking for any excuse to make RPGs more accessible and less reliant on players having to think. The whole point of the action RPG is that publishers can have their cake and then eat it too. You get the hack and slash combat of something like Skyrim, which means anyone can pick up and play it, but you still also get the sales from the more loyal, faithful core RPG crowd who'll likely buy anything with stats and choices. I just really don't want to see RPGs compromised. Given the mid-2000s, the late 2000s, we didn't really get many RPGs, and it's honestly a miracle that we're even getting games like Baldurs Gate 3 again, so that really is my little fear, that whole Twitch integration thing. For those reasons, I do think it's worth at least thinking about and having a discussion about, even if some might think it's an overreaction and we should just wait and see. Moving away from the streaming talk though, Baldurs Gate 3 appears to have a lot of potential and I'm genuinely excited about it. They've promised they've moved away from the rock, paper, scissors interactions of Original Sin, and they boast of far more depth and more debate within your party as you venture through the game world. The community update also touches on other features within the game as well. They answered some fan questions, and one was about difficulty. I really loved Original Sin's combat, and I actually did enjoy it enough to play it on a high difficulty setting, so it was really awesome to hear that it won't just be about enemy health and damage in Baldurs Gate 3, but we might even see unique encounters in high difficulties from the sounds of things. That is speculation, but they addressed that specifically, so I imagine they wouldn't talk about doing more with difficulty modes if they didn't have something really big planned. Lone Wolf is also back, which is really cool, and I'd imagine from the sounds of things that most of what we've been getting in Original Sin, most of those features are going to return just with the expansions that they've done with the Baldur's Gate Coat of Paint. Something I have been thinking about though, which is certainly not new to Baldur's Gate 3, but it's very much relevant to modern RPGs, and that is voice acting. I think it was Fallout 4 which seemed to normalise almost every game having full voice acting, and Baldur's Gate 3 is going to do that as well. Even if you've made your own character, you'll pick a voice and your character's going to talk throughout the game. Over the years though, I've really noticed that it limits creativity when it comes to interactions within the game. Writers and producers now have to be mindful when it comes to the amount of options available to the player because it's all going to now be voiced. I rarely see those Planescape Torment-like options these days, where you might have something crazy like 15 options to choose from for one bit of dialogue. I also find developers use less descriptive text because of this as well. And I mean, you might have a narrator, but games just seem less likely to explain what your characters are thinking or what they might be doing because they have this mindset that people just don't want to read in modern games. Ironically, I think this actually makes it worse for streaming. I think a game like Fallout 1, which has some voice acting, but only for like the really big moments, would actually make for a better streaming experience, given the streamer can actually read things aloud for everyone and get through those lengthy conversations a little bit quicker. Another thing I've noticed over the last few years is that a lot of players just find it harder to skim through conversations at their own speed, given you have the voice actor talking to your ear at the same time, and it makes it a little bit harder to concentrate when you're reading through. The solution I hear again is, oh, just turn it off. Alright, cool, so I miss out on the music, the sound effects, the big moments that are being voice acted. It's cool and all that voice actors are getting more work, but I'd love to see us go back to that old style, same with the cutscenes. I much preferred it when we only had cutscenes for those big moments, instead of them being throughout the game and having control taken away from the player all the time. Despite my little fears, I'm still really excited about Baldur's Gate 3. When it eventually gets its full release, hopefully next year, I do think it might be a Game of the Year contender, so I'm going to follow everything that's going on with it. I'm really excited, and come September 30, or probably like the 1st of October in my country, given the time zone differences, I'll get to jump in and check it all out, so I honestly can't wait. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks very much, and bye-bye.